want to jumpstart your garden even when there's still snow on the ground? Winter sowing's a great way to give you a head start on a thriving spring garden with minimal effort. Stick around to learn how you can start your seeds outdoors and let nature do the hard work for you. I tell you, winter sowing has just been a total game changer for me. It saves time, money, and effort. And best of all, it's so simple to do. You start your seeds outdoors in containers and let the weather take care of the rest. When the time is right, you're ready to transplant those seedlings out into the garden, and they're going to be strong and healthy. No more guesswork about when to start your seeds. No more babysitting, which is great. And best of all, no special equipment needed because that can get kind of pricey. Trust me, it's the easiest way to start your garden. Hi, I'm Linda, and I'd like to welcome you to Veggie 360, where you're going to learn how to grow great tasting veggies year-round, even in small spaces. All you need to winter sow is a container with a lid, potting mix, your favorite seeds, scissors or box cutter, tape to keep the cover on the container, and labels, as well as a marking pen, preferably fade resistant because those containers might be out in the sun for quite a while. You have many options for your containers. You can use a milk jug, an orange juice or soda bottle, or recycle a food container like a salad box. Or you can use small cups or recycled nursery pots inside a tote. Just make sure that your container is clear enough to be able to let the sunshine in. It also needs some kind of a top or a lid so that the seeds don't dry out and they're protected from the elements like the snow, heavy snow and wind. Your container needs to be deep enough to be able to hold 3 to 4 inches of soil, 7.5 to 10 centimeters, and have enough headspace, at least 2 inches, for those seedlings to grow. You want to put at least 3 inches of soil in your container. Deeper is always better because it holds more moisture and you just won't have to water quite as often. You'll also want to put some drainage holes in the bottom of the container and provide some sort of ventilation. So just go ahead and throw the cap away if you're using a milk jug or a bottle. If you're using something like this, go ahead and poke holes in the top just to let some air in. You can also use a seed flat like this one. It's easier to separate the seedlings, but you're going to need to watch very carefully because these are very small cells and they won't hold quite as much moisture. And in a drier climate, you're going to have to water more often. Now, I got this seed flat last year from Bootstrap Farmer. I absolutely love it. It's very sturdy, but best of all, it has these air channels on the corners. It allows for air pruning, which will give you more robust roots. I've included a link in the description below. I actually used this last year for sowing my beets, and let me tell you that they turned out much better than those that I had direct sown, simply because they had better root structure and I got an earlier harvest. There's many different types of seeds that you can winter sow successfully. This method was first developed for perennials and cold hardy flowers, but it does work quite well for vegetables, particularly those cold hardy vegetables like broccoli, spinach, kale, Swiss chard. Keep in mind though that the seeds will germinate later when they're sown outdoors than they would if they were sown indoors where the conditions are warmer. So pay attention to the days to maturity or days to harvest, especially if you're winter sowing those warm season crops. You want to make sure that your growing season is long enough for you to be able to get a good harvest before that first killing frost. I did a winter sowing video last year in which I came out and said, don't winter sow tomatoes, it takes too long for them to germinate. Well, guess what? I was wrong. I saw that others had winter sown tomatoes after I had made that video, so I decided to give it a try just for giggles and grins. And what I found was it works really well. The tomatoes that I winter sowed were very hardy and so productive. I was able to transplant them directly from the milk jug right into my garden without having to harden them off like I do those that were sown indoors. Yeah, they were a little bit smaller than those that I had started indoors, but boy, they caught up so quickly, and they were even more productive than those that I had carefully and meticulously grown indoors. The experience was so great, I'm actually going to be trying it with peppers and eggplants this year. Check back later and I'll let you know how it goes. Some seeds don't transplant very well, so these varieties are best sown directly in your garden. This includes most of your root crops like carrots, radishes, turnips, parsnips. I'm not saying that it can't be done. These are tap roots and they're very easy to damage, so it can be tricky. If you winter sow and transplant these, you want to be very, very careful, and you want to do it when the seedlings are still quite young, less prone to damage. I'm going to actually do a trial this year. I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison. Winter sown root crops versus direct sown root crops. I'll let you know how that turns out. Some gardeners say that beets don't transplant very well, but in my experience, I've never had any trouble transplanting beets. You'll also want to remember to winter sow some flowers to plant along with your vegetables. Flowers such as marigold, alyssum, cosmos, and zinnias attract beneficial insects to help with pollination and easier pest management. They also add lots of beauty to your garden. As I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of winter sowing is no more questions about when to start your seeds. You can start them anytime after winter solstice, and once the nighttime temperatures are consistently below 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees C. In our area, our last frost date is April 15th, so I like to winter sow the cool season vegetables and the cold hardy herbs in January or February. For the less cold tolerant vegetables and herbs, though, I like to wait until later in February and early March. But when the conditions are right, those seeds are going to germinate, and they're going to germinate at a much higher rate than what I have seen when I've started the seeds indoors. My favorite container to use is a milk jug. The first step is to punch holes in the bottom for drainage, and then cut it in half, leaving a hinge. It needs to be deep enough to hold 3 to 4 inches of potting mix. The potting mix doesn't need to be anything fancy. Just don't use a seed starting mix because it's expensive and doesn't provide the nutrients needed for seedlings to grow strong. A mix with fertilizer built in or compost added is great for providing those nutrients. To make it easier for the potting mix to absorb the water that it needs, you can pre-moisten the soil until it holds together in a ball. Fill the container with this pre-moistened potting mix, pressing down slightly as you go. Water well to further pre-moisten the soil and help it settle down so that the seeds will have good contact with the soil. You can add more soil if needed. The back of the package shows the spacing and planting depth, but you can disregard this because you're going to be transplanting these seedlings into the garden. Just make sure you don't plant too closely because separating them can become tedious and risk damaging the roots. The seeds will be protected from the elements, so for smaller seeds, just simply press them into the potting mix. No need to cover. For larger seeds, press them into the potting mix and then sprinkle lightly with more mix to cover them. The large seeds can be pushed down 1/4 inch below the surface. Water the seeds in carefully with a spray bottle so that you don't disturb the seeds. Place the label inside the container so that you'll know what you've planted. I like to use a fade-resistant marker because these containers are going to be outside for several months. Seal them with packing tape just so the wind won't blow the cover off. And remember, these containers need ventilation, so simply throw the cap away. Label the container on the outside to make it easier to see what you've planted, and also include today's date. To make sure that the potting mix has absorbed as much moisture as it can, I like to water from below, so I simply set it in water for about 30 minutes. Once you've sown your seeds, you want to place your containers outside as soon as possible. Where you set them really doesn't matter, as long as they're protected from high winds and that they get enough sun, as well as rain or snow for moisture. If you live in a drier area where you don't get enough rain or snow though, you want to gently drip the water in from the top so that you don't disturb the seeds, or you want to water from below. As long as the soil is frozen though, most likely you won't need to water. The seeds will germinate when the conditions are right for them. As the weather starts to warm, don't worry about those springtime temperature swings. It actually toughens up those seedlings. You may lose a few, but remember, this is survival of the fittest. If you are expecting a pretty substantial drop in temperature overnight though, go ahead and cover them up. Just make sure you remember to take the cover off the next morning. For those really, really warm spring days, remember, the temperature inside those containers can get kind of warm. So move those containers to a partially shaded area, preferably morning sun. Or you can open the containers during the day, but you just want to make sure that you close them back again at night. They're going to be ready to transplant into your garden once they have their first 2 sets of true leaves, or are 1 to 2 inches tall, or 1/2 to 5 centimeters tall. It's important, very important, that you don't let them get too big, or the roots are going to start getting tangled up. It'll be harder to separate them, and you risk damaging those roots. If you're not quite ready to transplant them into the garden at this point though, no problem. Simply pot them up into individual containers and let them grow on until you're ready to set them out into your garden. But keep them outside though. Don't bring them back inside. They were born outside, let them stay out there. See how easy it is to winter sow? Be sure and check back soon for a follow-up video where I'll share more tips on caring for your seedlings and the best way to transplant them into your garden successfully. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know what vegetables you have winter sown and how they turned out. Your experience could inspire and help others. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends and family who also want to be able to grow their own food. Let's grow more gardeners together and build a thriving food growing community. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye now.